The unexpected Warmark had always known his life as a double agent would be dangerous. He lived in the shadows, playing both sides in the Intergalactic War. Each day was a balancing act, staying one step ahead of both factions that wanted him dead if they ever found out his true allegiance. But nothing had prepared him for what was about to happen. It was a quiet day, the kind of day where everything felt normal. Mark was in the middle of a routine mission, relaying false information to the enemy. Everything was going smoothly, too smoothly. Then out of nowhere his communicator beeped with an encrypted message. His eyes narrowed. Only a handful of people knew how to reach him directly, and none of them were friends. He hesitated, then opened the message. His fingers shook slightly as the text appeared. "Meet me at the old refinery. I know who you are, and I know what you've done." Mark's mind raced. Who could possibly know? He checked the coordinates. The location was in enemy territory. Dangerous, but not impossible to access. Still, the fact that someone knew so much about him left a bitter taste in his mouth. His first instinct was to ignore the message. But curiosity gnawed at him, the desire to know more, to understand who was on the other end of that message. With a sigh, he packed his things and prepared to leave. This could be a trap, but it could also be an opportunity. Mark knew he couldn't trust anyone in this war. Everyone had their own motives, and loyalty meant nothing in a world built on lies. But there was something about this message that felt different. This was no ordinary threat. It was a warning. As he made his way to the refinery, Mark's mind wandered. He thought about the many faces he had worn, the many lies he had told. It was a lonely life, one that left no room for true friendship or trust. Yet, as he approached the refinery, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was the moment when everything would change. The refinery loomed ahead, a shadow in the dim light of the planet's setting sun. Mark crept through the broken gates, keeping low to avoid detection. His senses were on high alert. He was deep inside enemy lines, and any mistake could cost him his life. Yet, his instincts told him something was different this time. He moved silently through the abandoned facility, every step calculated. The air was thick with the scent of oil and rust. The silence was deafening, broken only by the occasional sound of distant machinery. He felt eyes on him, but when he looked, there was no one there. Mark reached the central room. A figure stood in the shadows, barely visible. The figure stepped forward slowly, the soft hum of her boots on the metal floor the only sound. She was tall, with dark hair tied back into a tight bun. Her eyes, however, were the most striking feature. Cold, calculating, yet there was something else hidden behind them. A secret. "Mark," she said quietly, her voice carrying through the empty space. "I know what you've been doing, and I know what you're capable of." He froze. How could she know? Who was she? "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice steady despite the rising tension in his chest. "I'm the commander's daughter," she replied, her gaze unwavering, "and I have a proposition for you." Mark's mind raced. The commander's daughter? She was supposed to be a high-ranking officer in the enemy faction, one of the most powerful figures in the war. Yet here she was, standing in front of him, offering him something. He couldn't figure it out. "A proposition?" Mark repeated. "You're here to make me an offer? After everything I've done?" "Yes," she said, her lips curling into a slight smile. "But it's not just any offer. It's an offer that could change the course of this war. All I need is your help." Mark studied her carefully, his mind trying to piece together the puzzle. He didn't trust her. He didn't trust anyone. But there was something about her that made him think twice. "What kind of help?" he asked cautiously. "The kind of help only someone like you can provide," she said, stepping closer. "You've been playing both sides, Mark. You've been feeding them lies, leading them to believe you're one of them. But I know the truth, and now you can help me destroy everything they've worked for." Mark felt a chill run down his spine. She was asking him to betray both factions, to play his final hand in a war that had already cost too many lives. "Why me?" he asked, his voice cold. "Why not just take out both sides yourself?" "Because I need someone who knows both factions inside and out," she said, her voice low. Someone who can manipulate them from within. Mark's eyes narrowed. He had always been good at manipulating others, but this felt different. This felt like the beginning of something much bigger than he could have imagined. He stood there staring at her, weighing his options. Trust her, or walk away? Just as he opened his mouth to speak, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the refinery. Mark's heart skipped a beat. They had company. The commander's daughter looked at him, a cold smile forming on her. Psst. The game has already begun, Mark, and you're already in the middle of it. Mark took a deep breath. He was in deeper than ever before, and there was no turning back. Crossing the line, Mark's heart raced as he heard the footsteps growing louder. The refinery, once a quiet and abandoned place, now felt like a trap closing in on him. The commander's daughter, who had just offered him an impossible choice, stood calmly in front of him, her eyes gleaming with determination. "We don't have much time," she whispered, her voice carrying an edge of urgency. "They're here, and they won't stop until they have us." Mark's mind spun. Who was coming? Who were they? And why hadn't he noticed the faint hum of engines earlier? He had underestimated how close he was to being caught. "You need to decide now," she continued, her hand reaching into her jacket and pulling out a small, sleek device. She pressed a button, and a map of the facility appeared, lighting up with red dots marking enemy positions. "The enemy's forces are already inside the compound. They're searching for us. If we don't move, we'll be trapped." Mark took the map from her hands, his fingers brushing hers for a split second. Something about that brief touch sent a chill down his spine. It was like there was more at play here than just a dangerous mission. He scanned the map quickly, calculating their best chance of escape. The refinery had only one exit, and it was guarded by dozens of heavily armed soldiers. Getting past them would be nearly impossible. But there was something else on the map. A hidden underground tunnel. It wasn't marked on any official documents, which meant it was a secret route, perhaps one that even the enemy didn't know about. "Underground," Mark muttered, pointing to the hidden tunnel. "That's our way out." "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice steady but tinged with concern. Mark looked at her, his eyes narrowing. "It's the only choice we have." He grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the tunnel entrance. The moment they started moving, everything seemed to shift. The once silent refinery was now filled with the chaos of distant gunfire and the heavy clanking of boots. Mark knew that the enemy was close, but the closer they got to the tunnel entrance, the more uncertain he became. He had been playing both sides for years, manipulating each faction to his advantage. But in that moment, with the commander's daughter by his side, he realized something he hadn't considered before. He was no longer just a spy. He was no longer the one controlling the game. She was. And he had no idea what game she was playing. They reached the tunnel entrance just as a door slammed open behind them. The sound of soldiers rushing toward their position was unmistakable. Without wasting another second, Mark shoved open the heavy steel door and pulled her inside. The tunnel was dark, the air thick with the smell of damp earth. They moved quickly, the sound of their footsteps muffled by the stone walls. The tunnel wasn't long, but it was deep, winding under the facility like a secret vein pumping with life. Mark felt a sense of relief as they put distance between themselves and the approaching soldiers, but the silence around them was unsettling. "This way," the commander's daughter said, her voice low. "We'll reach the rendezvous point in just a few minutes." Mark followed her, keeping his eyes on her every move. He couldn't help but wonder, was she really on his side? Or was this all part of a much bigger plan? Everything she had told him so far felt like a carefully crafted story designed to pull him deeper into a web of deceit. As they continued down the tunnel, Mark's thoughts raced. The factions were locked in a brutal war, each one vying for power and control. Mark had been caught in the middle of it for so long that he had lost track of who was right and who was wrong. All he knew was survival. He had never been loyal to any cause, until now. And that scared him. The commander's daughter glanced over her shoulder, catching his eye. "You're wondering who I really am, aren't you?" she asked, her voice a whisper in the darkness. Mark stopped walking, his mind spinning. Was it that obvious? Maybe, he replied cautiously. Maybe I'm just wondering how far I'm willing to go with you. She smiled faintly, but there was no warmth in it. You're already too far gone, Mark. There's no turning back. Her words hung in the air like a warning. Mark felt a sinking feeling in his gut. No turning back. He had heard that phrase before, and every time it was said, it meant the end of something important. The end of safety. The end of freedom. They reached the end of the tunnel, where a small access door stood hidden in the shadows. The commander's daughter tapped in a code on a hidden panel beside the door, and it slid open with a soft hiss. Beyond it lay a small, dark room, underground, isolated and secure. This is where we part ways, she said as she turned to face him. Her gaze softened for a moment before hardening again. I've given you everything you need to make a choice. Now it's up to you. Mark stared at her, trying to make sense of her words. Everything she had told him had been calculated, carefully crafted to lead him to this moment. But what was the real game? What was she really asking him to do? Before he could speak, the sound of gunfire echoed through the room, followed by the crackling of a voice over a comm device. Mark, you have 5 minutes. Make your decision. It was a familiar voice, one he had hoped never to hear again. The commander. Mark's heart raced. He was in deep now, deeper than he had ever been. One side wanted him to betray the other. And the commander's daughter? She was pulling him toward a dangerous game with no clear winner. The room felt smaller, the walls closing in on him as the seconds ticked away. What was his next move? And who could he trust? The answer, Mark realized, was as dangerous as the war itself. Nobody. The mission that changes everything. Mark's heart pounded as he stood in the dimly lit room, the soft hum of the comm device in his hand almost deafening in the silence. The commander's voice echoed in his ear, a cold reminder that there was no turning back. You have 5 minutes, Mark, the commander had said. Make your decision. But Mark didn't have a decision. Not yet. Not with everything he had learned in the past few hours. He looked at the commander's daughter standing before him, her eyes cold but filled with an intensity that he couldn't ignore. What do you want from me? Mark asked, his voice steady despite the storm brewing inside him. The commander's daughter didn't flinch. Instead, she turned, walking slowly toward the small, dimly lit table at the far end of the room. On it lay a collection of data chips, each one more dangerous than the last. She picked one up and held it out to him. This is everything, she said softly. The key to ending this war. But it's not just a weapon, Mark. It's a truth about both factions that they'll do anything to keep hidden. Mark's mind raced as he stared at the data chip. The weight of her words hung in the air, thick with the tension of what was at stake. Both factions were fighting for control of the galaxy. But what if they were both wrong? What if there was something darker, something more insidious at play, something that neither side was willing to admit? And what do you want me to do with it? Mark asked, his fingers itching to take the chip, to learn the truth it held. You're going to use it, she replied, her voice low and urgent. You're going to expose them both. All of them. Show the world the truth and let them tear each other apart. Mark's eyes narrowed. You want me to start a war? No, she corrected him sharply. I want you to end it. But first, you need to understand what this is. She walked over to a hidden compartment in the wall and opened it, revealing a series of holographic images. Images of 2 figures, both familiar to Mark. One was the commander, the other was a high-ranking officer from the enemy faction. Together, they stood in front of a massive dark structure, their hands shaking as they touched a control panel. This, she said softly, is where everything began. Mark studied the image closely, the memories flooding back. He had seen these 2 men before, leaders of both factions, locked in an unholy alliance that stretched far deeper than anyone knew. But what was the purpose of this meeting? Why were they standing together side by side? They were working together, Mark whispered, piecing the puzzle together. But why? Why would they join forces? Because they knew something you don't, she replied. Something that could change everything. Something that neither side wants the galaxy to know. Mark felt a chill run down his spine. He couldn't fathom it. If what she was saying was true, then the entire war, everything he had fought for, everything he had betrayed, was built on lies. But that wasn't all. There was more to this than he could possibly understand. "What is it?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she walked back to the table, picking up a small, glowing orb. She held it out to him, her fingers trembling slightly. "This is the key," she said. "The reason both factions are fighting, the reason they will never stop, no matter how many lives are lost." Mark took the orb, his eyes fixed on the soft blue glow that seemed to pulse in time with his heartbeat. It felt like it was alive, like it held something more than just data. It was a promise, or perhaps a curse, he wasn't sure which. "What is it?" Mark repeated, his voice more urgent now. "It's a weapon," she replied, her voice strained. "But not in the way you think. It's not a bomb or a weapon of mass destruction. No, it's far worse. It's a weapon of control, a weapon that can change the very fabric of reality." Mark's brow furrowed. "Control reality?" he asked, disbelief clear in his voice. "You're telling me that this thing can—" "Yes," she interrupted. "It can manipulate minds. It can bend people's will. And once it's activated, there's no stopping it. The factions will fight over it because they know whoever controls it controls everything. They'll stop at nothing to possess it." Mark stared at the orb, his mind racing. The weight of the truth was almost too much to bear. For years he had been working for these factions, betraying his own people, deceiving everyone around him. But now, with the orb in his hands, the stakes had changed. "What do you want me to do with it?" he asked again, his voice steady despite the storm of confusion and fear inside him. "Use it," she said, her voice resolute. "Expose the truth. Destroy the illusion of power they've built. Once they know what's at stake, they'll turn on each other. They'll tear themselves apart." Mark looked down at the orb. It felt warm in his hands, as though it was alive, as though it had a will of its own. He could feel the weight of the decision bearing down on him. But the truth was, he had already made his decision. There was no going back now. The war was never about power or glory. It was about control. And now, he was holding the key to ending it all. "Let's finish this," Mark said quietly, turning to face her. "Let's burn it all to the ground." But, as he turned, a sudden explosion rocked the room, sending them both crashing to the ground. The walls shook as alarms blared, and through the chaos, a voice crackled over the comms. "Mark," the commander's voice said, cold and menacing, "you've made a grave mistake." The game had changed, and there was no turning back. The betrayal. The explosion shook the underground room like a violent wave. Debris rained down from the ceiling, and the ground trembled beneath Mark's feet. His heart pounded in his chest as he scrambled to his feet. The glowing orb still clutched, tightly in his hand. Dust and smoke filled the air, choking him as he tried to find his bearings. What was that? The commander's daughter shouted, her voice barely audible over the deafening noise. Mark didn't answer right away. His mind was racing. The explosion had come from somewhere above them, an entrance, a trap set by someone. The question now was who? He glanced at her, his eyes narrowing. "They found us. They've already breached the facility." Her face twisted with a mix of determination and something darker, more desperate. "We need to move now," she hissed, grabbing his arm and pulling him toward the back of the room. Mark could hear the frantic footsteps of enemy soldiers approaching. They were getting closer, and time was running out. Without thinking, he followed her through a hidden door at the back of the room, leading them down a narrow corridor that seemed to stretch endlessly. The noise from above grew louder, and Mark's pulse quickened. There was no way out of this now. No way to escape the impending chaos. They were trapped. As they rounded a corner, Mark noticed something strange. An unfamiliar figure standing in the shadow of the corridor. The figure was tall, with a cloak that barely fluttered as they moved, as if they were a shadow themselves. Mark froze, his instincts kicking in. Who was this? An ally? Or an enemy? Keep moving, the commander's daughter whispered urgently, not even glancing at the figure. He's on our side. Mark didn't ask questions. He had learned long ago that trust was a luxury he couldn't afford. But in that moment, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The figure moved to the side, stepping into the light just enough for Mark to see their face, a face he recognized. It was one of his old contacts, a spy from his own faction. But there was something different about him now. His eyes were cold, distant, and there was no warmth in his expression. "You're late," the commander's daughter said, her voice flat and emotionless. "We need to get out of here." "No," the spy said, his voice low and almost too calm. "We need to stay." Mark's gut twisted. Something wasn't right. "Stay?" he repeated, his voice laced with disbelief. "You're telling me we should stay here and wait to die?" The spy didn't respond immediately. Instead, he turned, revealing a small device strapped to his wrist. A device that Mark instantly recognized. It was a tracker, but not just any tracker. It was a signal jammer, designed to cut off communications and disrupt any chance of escape. Mark's mind raced. This wasn't an accident. They had been led here, forced into a trap. Everything that had happened since the commander's daughter had given him that orb had been orchestrated. They were the targets. And the spy was the one pulling the strings. The commander's daughter stiffened, her eyes flickering to the spy's device. "You've betrayed us," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The spy smiled, but there was no humor in it, just cold, ruthless calculation. "No, sweetheart, you've betrayed me." Mark felt a knot tighten in his stomach. "What are you talking about? You think you're the one in control, Mark?" The spy sneered. "You think you've been playing both sides? Well, let me tell you something. The real players are the ones who never had to make a choice. We've been watching you, and now you're part of the game." Mark's blood ran cold. "What game?" he asked, his voice shaking with realization. "The game of control," the spy said, his voice dripping with malice. "You thought you were helping the commander's daughter to expose the truth to end the war? No. You've been playing right into my hands the entire time." Mark's head spun. Everything, the mission, the orb, the secrecy, had been a lie. He had trusted her, trusted the commander's daughter, believed that he was working to end the war, but it had all been part of a much larger plot. They had known all along that Mark would be the key to setting everything in motion. The commander's daughter stepped forward, her hand sliding behind her back. "You're a fool, Mark," she said softly. "The real war doesn't happen between the factions, it happens within them." Mark took a step back, his heart racing. You set me up?" "Of course," she said, her voice almost pitying. "You've been used from the very beginning, but now you can make your choice. You can join us or you can die here. It's up to you." Mark's mind was a whirlwind. He had been betrayed by the one person he had come to trust. But he couldn't let it end like this. Not now. Not when everything he had worked for was at his fingertips. The orb, the truth, it could still change everything. "I'm done with you," Mark spat, his voice shaking with rage. "You've made your choice, and now so have I." With a sudden movement, Mark slammed his fist into the spy's wrist, knocking the device from his hand. It skittered across the floor, useless now that it was damaged. The commander's daughter's eyes widened in surprise, but there was no fear in her gaze, only cold calculation. "You think you can stop this?" She sneered. "You have no idea what you're up against, Mark." Mark didn't respond. Instead, he turned and sprinted down the corridor away from them. He had no plan, no idea where he was going, but he knew one thing. He couldn't stay here. Not anymore. As he rounded a corner, the sound of footsteps behind him echoed in the narrow hallway. They were close, too close. He was running out of time. And that was when he heard it. The hum of the engines overhead, the sound of soldiers closing in, ready to finish the job. Mark's eyes widened. There was no escape. But then, Just as hope seemed lost, a door opened ahead of him. A figure appeared in the doorway, a familiar face. The commander. "Mark," the commander said, his voice cold. "You've made a grave mistake, but it's not too late. You still have a chance to make the right choice." Mark stared at the commander, his mind spinning. Had he truly made a mistake? Or was the commander just another part of the game? The UA. Walls were closing in, and in that moment Mark realized there was no escaping the war anymore. He had become a part of it, no matter which side he chose. Allies or enemies? The air was thick with tension as Mark stood in front of the commander, the weight of his decision pressing down on him like an invisible force. The cold, calculating eyes of the commander locked onto his, and for a moment, Mark felt like he was being judged, examined by someone who had already made up his mind about him. "You still don't understand, do you?" the commander said, his voice a calm whisper in the chaos of the collapsing facility. "It's not about right or wrong, it's about control. Always has been. You've been playing a dangerous game, Mark, but you never understood the stakes. Now you're about to lose everything." Mark clenched his fists, trying to suppress the surge of anger that bubbled up inside him. The commander's words were like daggers, cutting through the layers of confusion that had clouded his mind, ever since the commander's daughter had introduced him to the truth about the war. But there was something else in the commander's tone, something that wasn't just threatening but pleading. "This is your last chance," the commander continued, stepping closer. "You can join us. Join me. We can end this game. Together." Mark shook his head, stepping back instinctively. "You think I don't see through you? This whole thing, this war, this manipulation, it's all a lie, isn't it?" The commander smiled, but it was a dark, twisted smile. "Is it? Or are you the one who's been lied to? Mark, you've always been a pawn. Don't you see that? The factions never wanted peace, they wanted power, and now we have the power to take it all." Mark's heart pounded. The orb, the truth, the commander was talking about something even deeper than the factions themselves. This wasn't just about two sides fighting for control. It was about something else entirely. The kind of power that could reshape the universe itself. "The truth is," the commander said, "the game was never about winning the war. It was about controlling what comes after. And now, with that orb in your hands, you can choose. You can help us take it all, or you can let it slip through your fingers." Mark felt a shiver run down his spine. The orb was more than just a tool. It was the key to everything. He could feel its power pulsing in his hand, the very essence of it drawing him in. But at the same time, something inside him screamed to run, to fight back against the commander's manipulations. But he had no time to think. The ground shook again, more violently this time. Alarms blared throughout the facility, and the sound of gunfire echoed in the distance. It was clear that time was running out. "Mark, we have to make a choice," the commander urged. "This is our moment. Don't waste it." Just then, a sharp cry echoed through the corridors, followed by the sound of footsteps. Mark turned instinctively, his hand moving to his side as if reaching for a weapon that wasn't there. Through the smoke and shadows, a figure emerged. It was the commander's daughter. Her clothes were torn, blood streaked across her face, but her eyes were as fierce as ever. She looked at Mark, her gaze hard and unyielding. "You're making a mistake," she said, her voice low and dangerous. Mark didn't know what to think anymore. The woman he had trusted, the one who had pulled him into this mess, was standing before him, bloodied and battle-worn. But there was something different about her now. Something broken. "We've been lied to, Mark," she said, her voice trembling with both anger and fear. "Both of us. You're not the only one caught in the middle. I never wanted any of this. But now it's too late to turn back." The commander scoffed, stepping between them. "Don't listen to her, Mark. She's already made her choice. You can see where it's led her. We can still win this. We can still have everything we've ever wanted." Mark's mind spun. He didn't know who to trust anymore. The commander's daughter, who had manipulated him from the start, or the commander who had orchestrated the entire war in the first place. They were both offering him something. Power, control, the chance to end the war once and for all. But at what cost? "This isn't about winning. Mark said, his voice filled with conviction. This is about the future. The truth. We can't keep playing their game. The commander's face twisted in frustration. You're a fool, Mark. You can't stop this. You've already crossed the line. It's too late for you to play the hero now. You've been a part of this from the beginning. That's not true, Mark replied, his voice hard. I never wanted this. None of us did. He turned to the commander's daughter, his eyes searching hers. I know you've been hiding something. I know there's more to this than we're being told. What's the real plan? She hesitated for a moment, her gaze flickering between him and the commander. The weight of the moment pressed down on her, but finally, she spoke, her voice barely a whisper. There is no real plan, Mark, she said, her words almost breaking under the weight of their truth. We've been fighting for something that doesn't even exist. The power we thought we had, it was all just a lie. We were pawns too, just like you. The commander's daughter stepped back, her eyes haunted. We've all been used, Mark, and now it's time to end this. Together. Mark felt a flicker of hope ignite inside him. There was a way out. There had to be. If they worked together, if they could expose the lies, perhaps they could still change the course of the war, stop the cycle of manipulation that had plagued their universe for so long. But before he could speak, a loud crash interrupted them, followed by the unmistakable sound of approaching footsteps. Enemy soldiers were closing in faster than he had anticipated. There was no more time to think. Mark, the commander said, his voice urgent, almost pleading. We don't have much time. If you want to survive, you'll have to make a choice. Now. Mark's gaze flicked to the commander, then to the commander's daughter. Both of them had their hands outstretched, offering him a path. Two different paths, each with its own promise of power and destruction. But he knew one thing for sure. Whatever choice he made, there was no going back. Mark's grip tightened around the orb, his heart pounding in his chest. This was the moment. The point of no return. It's over, Mark said, his voice steady. We end it now. He turned, not toward the commander, but toward the doorway leading out of the facility, toward freedom, toward the unknown. But as he stepped forward, the sound of the commander's voice echoed behind him. You'll regret this, Mark. You can't escape what you've done. Mark didn't look back. He couldn't afford to. The final play, Mark's feet pounded against the cold metal floor as he sprinted down the narrow corridor, the weight of the orb still burning in his hand. The air was thick with the acrid scent of burning machinery, smoke swirling in thick clouds. That blurred his vision. Behind him, the facility was collapsing, but his mind was focused solely on the path ahead. He had made his choice, but he had no idea what awaited him at the end. One thing was certain. The game was changing. And this time, he wasn't going to play by their rules. The footsteps behind him were growing louder. Enemy soldiers had heard him. They were closing in. Mark's heart pounded in his chest and sweat beaded on his forehead. It didn't matter. He couldn't stop now. Not when everything was on the line. He turned a corner, narrowly dodging a laser blast that singed the edge of his jacket. The heat of it left a searing scar in the air, but Mark didn't flinch. His mind was clear, his instincts sharper than ever before. The orb had done something to him, something that he couldn't explain. It was like it had unlocked a part of his mind, pushing him beyond the limits he had always known. He rounded another corner, the end of the hall just in sight. But as he reached it, a figure stepped out of the shadows, blocking his way. Mark froze, the sudden appearance of the figure catching him off guard. It was the commander's daughter. You're making a mistake, she said, her voice low and steady, but there was something in her eyes that made Mark hesitate, something that seemed almost vulnerable. Mark's breath hitched. You followed me. She nodded, her expression hardening. This isn't the way, Mark. We can still change things. You don't have to do this. Change what? He shot back, the orb in his hand glowing brighter as if reacting to his frustration. The war? The lies? You don't get it. We were never supposed to win. This whole thing was a game that you, both of you, set up. Now I'm ending it. "You don't know what you're doing," she warned, her voice rising in pitch. "They'll kill us both if we expose the truth. They'll tear the galaxy apart. I don't want that. But I have to be sure this isn't a mistake." Mark clenched his fists. "Then stop playing both sides and pick a side for once. If you're really on my side, help me." The tension hung between them like a heavy fog. Mark could see the internal battle waging in her eyes. She was torn between the loyalty she had built for so long and the truth that was now staring her in the face. Mark didn't have time for hesitation. He made his move. Mark lunged forward, pushing past her with surprising force. She stumbled back but quickly regained her footing. "Mark, wait!" she shouted, reaching out for his arm, but it was too late. Mark was already running again, his footsteps echoing through the crumbling hallway. Behind him, he could hear her voice calling after him, but he didn't turn back. He had made his choice. The control room was just ahead, where the final decision would be made. Everything he had done, the lies, the betrayal, the broken trust, had led him to this moment. He couldn't afford to fail now. The fate of everything depended on him. Mark pushed through the last set of doors, stepping into the control room. It was empty, save for the holographic terminals and blinking lights that seemed to mock him in their silence. He quickly moved toward the central console, his fingers flying across the panel, inputting the codes he had memorized from the commander's daughter. As the screens came to life, displaying maps and classified data, Mark hesitated for a brief moment. The enormity of what he was about to do sank in. He could destroy everything, bring both factions to their knees, expose the truth about the war, and watch as the galaxy descended into chaos. Was this really the right thing to do? But then he thought of the people he had seen suffer. The innocent, civilians, the families torn apart by the endless conflict. For them, it was never about power or control. It was about survival. "This ends now," he muttered to himself, and pressed the final command. The system hummed to life, a series of rapid beeps echoing through the room as the data transfer began. Within moments, the screens flickered with new data, hidden files, secret alliances, and the true history of the war. Everything that had been concealed for years was now laid bare before him. Mark couldn't look away, but as the final file began to load, a sudden surge of energy pulsed through the room, causing the screens to crackle and blink out of existence. Mark stumbled back, confusion clouding his mind. What the hell? Before he could react, the doors to the control room slammed open with a violent crash, and armed soldiers poured in, their weapons raised. Mark barely had time to move before they surrounded him, their guns trained on his chest. "Drop the orb," one of them shouted, his voice low and commanding. Mark's heart raced. The orb was the key. He couldn't let them take it. With quick reflexes, he raised the orb high above his head, and before anyone could react, he smashed it onto the ground. The explosion that followed was deafening, sending a shockwave through the entire facility. The soldiers were thrown back, their screams swallowed by the chaos. Mark shielded his eyes, the intense light from the orb filling the room. When the light finally faded, everything was eerily still. The soldiers were gone, and the facility had fallen silent. Mark stood alone, in the room, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The orb was destroyed, its power dissipated into the air, but now there was nothing left. The truth had been exposed. The war was over, but at what cost? He turned toward the broken door and stepped out into the corridor, the weight of everything finally sinking in. The enemy had been defeated, the factions exposed for the lies they had built their empires on. The galaxy would never be the same again. As he walked, Mark couldn't shake the feeling that his actions had set something else in motion, something even bigger than the war. He didn't know what it was yet, but he could feel it. And deep down, he knew that this was just the beginning. Endgame. The silence that followed the destruction of the orb was unnerving. Mark stood alone in the wreckage of the control room, the echoes of the explosion still ringing in his ears. The intense, blinding light from the orb had disappeared, leaving only a faint residue of energy in the air, like a distant memory that would soon fade. The soldiers who had once surrounded him were either unconscious or gone, but the aftermath of what he had just done weighed heavily on his shoulders. He couldn't deny it. The war had ended, but not in the way anyone had imagined. The truth had been exposed, and with it the very foundation of both factions had crumbled. Alliances built on lies had shattered, and the galaxy was now a broken, chaotic mess. The power dynamics had shifted, but the question remained: what came next? Mark's footsteps echoed through the darkened hallway as he walked away from the control room. The facility was falling apart around him, a crumbling monument to the lies he had helped expose. The sound of distant explosions filled the air, reminding him that the chaos wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The flickering lights cast long, haunting shadows on the walls as he made his way toward the exit. But as he approached the doors, the unmistakable sound of heavy footsteps halted him. He froze, his instincts kicking in as he reached for his sidearm. But before he could draw it, a voice called out from the darkness. "Mark." It was a voice he knew all too well. The commander's voice. Calm, composed, as if he had been expecting this moment. Mark didn't turn around. He knew what was coming next. He had known all along that this wasn't over. "So, you finally decided to show up," he said, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. "What's your plan now that your precious war is over?" The commander stepped into the dim light, his face calm, but his eyes were sharp, calculating. "The war isn't over, Mark," he said, his voice low. "It's just beginning." Mark's mind raced. "What do you mean?" "The factions are finished. The truth is out. Everything you fought for is exposed." The commander smirked. "The truth is a weapon, Mark, and you've just given it to the world. But you don't understand the consequences of what you've done. You've changed the game, but you haven't won it." Mark's grip on his weapon tightened. "You're delusional if you think I'm going to let you turn this back into a war. The galaxy deserves better than your twisted ambitions." "Oh, I'm not talking about me, Mark," the commander said, stepping closer. "I'm talking about them, the people who will rise from the ashes of your little rebellion. Those who will fight for power now that the truth is out. They'll destroy everything again, and it will be your fault. You've opened Pandora's box." Mark felt a chill run down his spine. "What are you saying? Who's left to fight for power?" The commander's eyes glinted with cold amusement. "The ones who never cared about the war. The ones who never cared about the truth. They've been waiting for this, and now they'll take advantage of the chaos you've unleashed. You see, Mark, the true game was never about the war between the factions. It was about who controls the aftermath." Before Mark could respond, a loud crash echoed from behind him. The doors to the facility slammed open and a group of heavily armed soldiers stormed in, their weapons raised. Mark spun around, instinctively reaching for his sidearm. But as the soldiers approached, he realized with a sinking feeling that they weren't here to arrest him. They were here to finish what the commander had started. "It's over, Mark," the commander said, his voice carrying a hint of satisfaction. "You've lost. You just don't know it yet." Mark's mind raced. This was a setup. All along it had been a setup. He had thought he was ending the war, exposing the lies and freeing the galaxy from the grasp of corrupt leaders. But now, as the soldiers closed in on him, he realized that he was just a pawn, a piece in a much larger game. The commander stepped back, signaling for the soldiers to move forward. "You've made your move, Mark. Now it's my turn." In that moment, everything seemed to slow down. Mark's breath came in short, panicked bursts as he looked around, trying to think of a way out. But there was no escape. Not this time. His eyes flicked to the orb's shattered remnants on the floor. Its power was gone, but the destruction it had caused was far from over. The consequences of his actions were unfolding before him, and there was no turning back. The soldiers were closing in. Mark's heart raced. He had come so far, fought so hard, but now it seemed like everything was slipping through his fingers. "You're too late," a voice called from the shadows. Mark's head snapped up. It was the commander's daughter. She stepped into the light, her eyes filled with a mix of defiance and fear. "I've been trying to stop this from the beginning," she said, her voice trembling with urgency. "Mark, the commander has already set his plan in motion. You've given him the perfect opportunity to seize control. If we don't stop him now, it'll be too late. Mark's heart skipped a beat. What was she talking about? He's not trying to save the galaxy, she continued, her eyes desperate. He's trying to control it. You've exposed the truth, yes. But he's been waiting for this, for the chaos to take hold. And now he's going to manipulate it to his advantage. He's going to make sure no one can stop him. Mark's mind spun as he tried to process what she was saying. The commander was the one pulling the strings all along. But how? How had he planned this from the start? How do we stop him? Mark asked, his voice barely a whisper. The commander's daughter looked around, her gaze flickering to the soldiers closing in on them. There's only one way, she said, her voice low. We destroy the facility. We take out the control systems, everything, before he can activate his backup plan. Mark nodded, his mind made up. The final play had begun. As the soldiers advanced, Mark and the commander's daughter turned toward the central control panel. With a final glance at each other, they rushed toward it, their steps synchronized in the face of certain danger. We can't let him win, Mark said through gritted teeth. We won't, she replied, her voice filled with determination. Together, they reached the panel, and with a single powerful command, they initiated the self-destruct sequence. The countdown began.